for that great introduction. I'm going to come over here to my, oh, does somebody have the box for the video? I just had it in my hand. Oh well, there is a video out about Sacco and Vanzetti. It's a documentary. I do have it with me, I'm going to tap into it. But anyway, my story begins with seeing this video. I saw the program at the Boston Public Library. They were airing the video. This is 2006. And I'd always heard in my family that we had a Sacco and Vanzetti connection. And my mother used to say, oh yeah, my parents fed them after so-and-so was executed. And I said to myself, yeah, every Italian has a connection to Sacco and Vanzetti, Mom, whatever. But I went to see the documentary, and there was a question and answer with the director afterwards. And come to find out, Spencer Sacco, I think he's great-grandson of grandson of Dante, son of Nicola Sacco, lived across the street from my grandparents. And she did, after her husband died, Mrs. Sacco lived across the street. She had to work. She had bills to pay. My grandmother would take her son, and she took children and Italian kids from the neighborhood, as Italians do, and wouldn't you know it was the truth. So I went down the rabbit hole of Sacco and Vanzetti research in 2006, and I have not stopped since. I've been through the Felicani collection at the Boston Public Library. This is artifacts, case notes, pictures, anything you can imagine having to do with the case. A lot of it's online that you can see. Some of the material is fair use. It's on their website. I've copied pictures here. If you see that website, you may see some things that are familiar. I've also taken my own pictures of the Felicani, some of the artifacts, their death masks, some of the pins that people wore is when they were protesting the results of the case and the progression of the case. Those are my own pictures, so I'll point those out when we get there. So, how many people know about Sacco and Vanzetti in the room already? All right. And all right. And I'm going to ask two people. What do you know about Sacco and Vanzetti?
Well, they were Italian immigrants who happened to be anarchists, who happened to be falsely charged with a crime in Braintree.
Exactly. Beautifully spoken. And anybody else? Let's see, one more person. What do you know about Sacco and Vanzetti? Yes.
Well, I read it a long time ago, but I seem to remember that they weren't allowed, other Italians were not allowed to testify in their behalf.
Correct. We're going to see that in my information. That is absolutely right, and that's un-American. Anyhow, all right, maybe we can put the lights down and I can get on into it. So one of the things that maybe people don't know is that Sacco from Italy came here to Milford and lived not too far away from us right now. So I didn't know that until I moved to Milford, which is funny enough. So then I went out, I found some information there too that I'm going to share with you. So, okay, so the murder trial of these two immigrants was one of the most controversial legal cases in American history. There were so many things that came under the category of railroad of justice, of persecution because of their politics and their Italian, quote, race. At the time, Italians were not considered white. I don't know if any of you have seen, there's an article in the New York Times about it a couple of years ago that talked about how Italians chose to be considered white at the time, and I'm not making any judgments one way or the other, politically, racially, culturally, any of those things. We're not going to do that here. So at the time, Southern Italians in particular were considered not white. They were treated as humans. They were treated as second-class citizens. And their trial put all this on display. So, I'm gonna move, can I move this just a little bit that way, is that all right? And then I can go in between, there we go. Because I move around a lot. Okay, what was happening in the world at the time? So we're talking about the early 1900s, what's happening in America. We've just turned the century. Has anybody seen the film 1900 by Bernardo Bertolucci? It's a long film and it's an odd one. Okay, anybody ever seen Metropolis by, what is that, Fritz Lang? Or pictures of it? Okay, anybody seen, yeah, those films have to do with the industrialization of America. And that is what was happening at the end of the 1800s coming into the, come on in. Absolutely, the 1900s. And so jobs were going away. In Italy, most of the work was, if you were in the southern part of Italy, was rural. Most Italian, sort of the lower class, were working in the farms. There was a great disparity between the haves, the have-nots. There was the padroni system in Italy, where it would be one person who had the fiefdom of the farm, then you'd have the tenant workers, and they wouldn't make very much. They were starving at the time. There was a drought. The Arno flooded and killed a lot of people in various parts of Italy from that. There was, at the time, the black shirts, or fascists. Fascism was on the rise. I think mostly, I've heard it described, people saying that fascism gave people structure that they were looking for. They were looking for a type of society that had laws and strata. You know, there was the upper class, the lower class, the middle class. They wanted it to be like this. But the peasant or the lower class were not making any money. They were starving. They had no jobs. They had no future, particularly in the Italian system, where if there were 5 brothers, the older brother got everything, the other 4 brothers had to make their way, and there was no way to make in Italy at the time. So this was also the rise of socialism around the world. We have things happening in Russia. We have things happening in Poland. Workers' rights, labor's rights, as these machines came in, started to become an issue. Because people were expected to work longer hours. They were supposedly easier. They were supposed to have leisure time, which of course they didn't have. They were making less, their jobs were disappearing. So a trip across the ocean looked pretty good to these folks. And as we know, we had that big immigrant wave at that time of many different cultures, but the Italians came in droves, mostly from southern Italy. And so I put a picture up here about Mussolini. He was Prime Minister of Italy between 1922 and 1943. Many people departed Italy because of Mussolini's strict, say, fascist ideals. There were clashes happening between the fascists, socialists, anarchists, the Reds. So it became sort of the Red Scare. And that also fueled a lot of immigration to the United States from countries where Reds, people of socialism, communism, those kinds of things were being rooted out and killed. So it was, sometimes to come here was their saving grace. What was happening in Boston was we had just had this large wave of Irish immigration. They had now raised up a little bit of a strata. They were now police, they had government jobs, they had worked up their way, and now it was time for the Italians. What happened in the North End, and I'm going to bring up the molasses flood and point out this book, which is Ann Beard's favorite, as she said. Dark Tide, this is available in the library, wonderful book. It's about the molasses flood in Boston. It reads like a mystery novel. It's wonderful. And so what had happened was, this was primarily the Italian neighborhood. And I'm going to come over this way. And the poorest neighborhood at the time. So if you read the book, you'll find out a big tankard of molasses was right on the pier. I'm going to point. Oh, there we go, way up in there in the heart of the North End. It was cracking. They didn't pay any attention to it. It was money, 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 molasses, molasses, molasses. And sugar was mostly for alcohol, basically. So, and this is a picture of the flood. And I don't remember how many deaths there was, but it was devastating, as you can see, to the North End. And this is at the end of Commercial Street. And people had no recourse. They lost their homes, they lost their lives, they lost their livelihood, and the city wasn't doing anything about it. What happened is the locals decided to organize, and they joined together and had benevolent societies started to help, but they had already had these sort of underground benevolent societies to help other Italians. But this is what began sort of that local advocacy for themselves. So I wanted to put that in there. I always put in the molasses flood because I believe that's what helped Italians kind of find themselves in this city. They banded together, they worked towards a cause, and they were successful. So let's skip ahead. Let's meet our two gentlemen. So this is Bartolomeo Vanzetti. He was from Via Falletto in the Piedmont region, which is up north in Italy. He was kind of a dreamer, wasn't really skilled, kind of bounced around a lot, couldn't really find himself, an idealist. Because he was rather unskilled, he did a series of jobs. Before he came to the United States, he was working as a baker's apprentice. He hated that. At the age of 19, his mother died of cancer, and he was very close to his mother, and he was just heartbroken and decided to leave Italy to come to America to try a new life. But even though he wasn't schooled, he was very well read and was known to quote Dante and Shakespeare to his fellow workers in places where he lived. So he landed, let's see, where did he, I want to say he ended up living in the Plymouth area, and that's where he was when he was originally arrested. So Sacco, I'm going to spend a little more time because he's a local guy. Nicola Sacco came from a very prosperous farming family in a place near Puglia called Torremaggiore. Puglia is the heel, and you can see where the little dot is. It's a little blurry. And immigrants had to be sponsored by somebody to come to the United States. Mr. Calzone, we have seen Calzone Park here in Milford. Mr. Calzone, from that town, Torremaggiore, almost the whole town immigrated here to Milford. Yes.
The Calzones, this is my great uncle.
Don't you love that?
He
Oh, I'll pick
was
your
my
brain.
grandmother's brother.
Ah, I love it. Yes. Love it. Love it. Local flavor. And so wonderful. So he sponsored, so Sacco was actually a skilled worker. He didn't really have to come to the United States. He had a pretty good life in Italy, but he wanted something different and decided that he would come to the United States, make some money, and then go back and live like a king in Italy. But he was sponsored to come here from Mr. Calzone, who also helped him get a job. And so the other things that were happening in the country at the time, we're going to return to Mr. Sacco. Because of this disparity, the socialists, the anarchists, there was a lot of that activity going on in the United States. Has anybody ever heard of Emma Goldman? Yes, some, no, okay, a couple. Emma Goldman was a socialist, agitator, communist, and she was responsible for bombing Wall Street. And this was in, I want to say 1919. Here we go, I have it over here. Yeah, the 1920, at the beginning of 1920, she was supposedly a confidant of somebody who I'm going to mention next, of Luigi Galliani, who was a very famous anarchist lecturer and labor organizer. And they found later that the bombs were appropriated and attributed to Gallianists, of which Emma Goldman connected with, and that's how they were able to. But it was devastating, and it set off a Red Scare here in the United States. So terrorist bombs were happening in, Philadelphia, in Washington. Judge Palmer, if anybody's ever remember their history class, the Palmer raids, which were happening all over the country, mostly East Coast, New York, Philadelphia, Washington. But these are pictures of homes that were bombed by these same socialist, anarchist kinds of groups. And they were targeting specific people who had say in workers' rights, labor organization cases and trials and things like that. And they targeted these people. And I believe the only death there was a maid in Palmer's house. But one of the bombers lost some of their body parts, unfortunately, and was not successful in the full bombing. But at these bombings, they also found leaflets that, down with that kind of thing, referring to the anarchist party. Wrong way. There we go. Okay, here is Luigi Galliani. These are sort of the players kind of putting the chess pieces in place of why did they pick these guys up? These innocent two guys. Innocent, quote unquote. So Luigi Galliani was anybody ever heard of Galliani? No, okay. He emigrated from Italy. He had subversive newspapers. He was a well-known writer, orator, apparently just an amazing orator. And he moved to Bar, Vermont, and that is a picture of a Bar, Vermont quarry. Barry. Thank you. Barry, now I know how to say it correctly, Barry, Vermont, to labor organize. But he was very influential in the Italian community for a particular reason that he was publishing newspapers in Italian. In the United States at the time, well, how were newspapers published? In English. Most Italians didn't read English. They could read about subversive anarchist newspapers, and this was one of the ways, too, that I think they were able to organize so effectively. There was a language barrier, so they were speaking their language. They were talking to them. These immigrants had come to the country and were taking these low-paying jobs, were being discriminated against, were being treated like animals and second-class citizens, and he was offering them a way of organizing themselves, banding together to make change. Unfortunately, the change that he was propagating was violence. He believed in everything and anything necessary to do to get your point across. And so he is sort of almost like a patron saint to Italians. If you travel to Italy, you may see, Galliani Square. In my grandpa's hometown in Atina, near Rome, there is this huge monument to Galliani. So you'll see that. All right, now, here is also some of the reasons why Italians were here. This one I just found online. I'd never seen that before. This was the way Italians were depicted. in the media. As you can see, much like African Americans, maybe of an earlier time where they, exaggerated body parts and put them in positions of subservience. So this is how they were being depicted. But look at the artwork that they were doing here in carving granite. Here at laying trolley bricks. They were hard workers. And I'm going to mostly talk about the stone cutters because that's where my relations are too. And the famous Milford pink granite. I use that, I just wanted to put that in there. I use that, there's a piece in my book about my character sees this pink granite in an expensive house she's working in, and they're treating her like a dog. And here's this granite from where she's from. So,
my grandfather, he used to lay the dynamite in the quarries in Milford. And back then, you had to put the dynamite in, light a match, and run for your life. There was no timers, no computerized buttons.
Wow, incredible. All right, so because of this industrialization also, workers were really, as I said, they were being taken advantage of. Long work hours, dangerous conditions, child labor. So this is what was happening with the rest of the country. This is out in the West Coast, the Farmer Labor Party, Cesar Chavez information. But they were not peaceful. This is violence breaking out during one of the striking demonstrations. And union organizers were treated not very well either. They were seen as the enemy. They were beaten up, but they kept at it. And some of the more strong workers' protection rights come from this time. These strikes also happened in this area. So if we wind our little clocks back, if we look back to, say, Lowell and the mills, there were strikes happening there for the workers' rights as well. And this just continued, that energy, this people trying to organize to make their lives better. So, all right, Mr. Sacco worked in the Draper Shoe Factory. Mr. Calzone got him a job, first sweeping the floors, and he worked his way up, and he got some special training, paid to have the training, to become what's called a shoe trimmer, and it's trimming the soles of the shoes. He was well liked. He was given a gun to the owner of the Draper Shoe Factory liked him so much that he asked him to go to another factory of his, and he gave him a gun to work as a night watchman. So he was a trusted worker. But also, the statistic here, 35,000 people a year were either maimed or killed in industrial accidents. And this is no recourse. They didn't get pension, they didn't get money to help them out. They were poor immigrants. They were just, I don't want to say the words SOL, but I think you know what that means. We won't say that on TV. Right. All right, so Mr. Vanzetti, not as skilled. He's working in Fall River in quarry as a stone cutter. He hated this work. It was not for him. There was a new railroad being built in Springfield, Mass. And later he worked for the Plymouth Cordage Company. He had moved to Plymouth. He had moved in with an anarchist family. And so there was discussions going on in the home. There were newspapers and flyers and information. So he was exposed to a lot. He was able to exchange ideas with this family. And they had a community of anarchists that had meetings and benevolence clubs. I'll show a few pictures of that after this in a moment. But this is just this is a pretty good picture of a quarry. My grandpa worked in some of these. I'm sure he crossed paths with either of them at some point in a quarry because he was a mason. So let's see here. All right. So here we go, starting with the action. Now, there's a big question in every piece of literature that I've looked at that asks, why did Sacco become an anarchist? He came from a fairly prosperous family. He was doing well. He had a good job. He had met his wife. He was a young dad. He had had his son Dante, and he had met, his wife was an anarchist as well. Rosina Sacco, they met at an anarchist picnic. I'll have some pictures later on of this. I know, right? That's all. So, in 1913, there was a strike at the Draper factory. Now, some people believe, you folks know about this?
Yes, I do.
Excellent. Some people say that there was infiltration by the IWW, International Workers, I don't remember what the other W was for.
World
Thank you.
of the world.
Thank you. And that they were infiltrating and kind of causing trouble. There was a large Italian community that worked at this Draper factory. They were Gallianists. There were pockets of anarchist groups here in Milford and in Hopedale. It was just what people were doing. They were socialists, they weren't fascist, they were for people's rights. They were for no government, no rules, because there were so many rules that were put upon them. So about 1,000 workers decided to go on strike. They wanted better working conditions. They wanted a 9-hour workday. Imagine that. They were striking for 9 hours to work. And there were other things. They felt that they weren't being treated professionally or respectfully by the management of the Draper Shoe Company. So they went on strike. And in front of the Draper main office, about 1,000 of them started to demonstrate. And if you've been to Hopedale Park, marching along the sides of the river and screaming slogans and whatever. And what the police were called, these are billy clubs that were used on the strikers. And a gentleman by the name, let me see if I can say it, Emilio
Bacchiocchi.
Bacchiocchi, thank you, was shot in the back of the head.
He lived down in Plains.
I love it. So, thank you. He lived on the plains. What is the plains for our viewing audience?
The section of Milford, the side of the tracks that you could live in if you were Italian.
There we are.
Yeah, there is a section, well, I'll tell you after, but there's a book
Great.
about Draper, and this section is in it.
I
Oh, okay.
I was going to bring it, actually. I copied it. It was fascinating. Anyway, so, all right. And here is a picture of the Draper factory at the time. It's not a great picture, I'm sorry. While I was writing about the Draper factory, I sat at the Draper factory, at the land, listening to those ghost voices speak to me. So, Mr. Bacchiocchi was shot in the back of the head. He was a young father, about the same age as Sacco. He may have been from the same town as Sacco. Many people were from the same area. And I'm sure Sacco could relate to him. And that here was this person who could be him, who was shot for his ideas. And I believe, and it's not written anywhere, but I believe that changed his mind. That galvanized his commitment to the anarchist cause. So what they did is they, Italians, here we go. These are pictures of some of the anarchist parties that they had nearby. One of these is at Louisa Lake, and I can't tell you which one, I'm sorry. But it was in and around the area at the state parks where we have those beautiful lakes. They would have picnics. And at these picnics, they would have plays and song and dances and food and plenty of pulpits for people to talk about their ideas. And sharing of newspapers, the Italian newspapers. I had a chance to be in Italy last year, And the film 1900 was filmed in this very historic house in near, I can't remember what town it is, I'm sorry. But these were actual puppets. They had stills and they had examples of these puppets that were used in anarchist productions at the house. So I took a picture of that. And this is just an example of what these sort of socialist get-togethers would be like. There'd be music, people playing ocarinas and mouth harps and dancing. So it was a social event, you know? It wasn't just all politics and ideas and fiery, you know, speeches. All right, so Mr. Vanzetti, he could not stand being in the factories anymore. He was an outdoorsy kind of guy. He decided to be a fish peddler, and this is his push cart for the Italian community. And in Plymouth, he loved all people, children and animals, made friends along his route. Mostly he was an eel peddler. Italians eat a lot of eels around holiday time. It was cheap, nutritious. Exactly. All right, so around the same time, here is some of the information that was going out about immigrants. And this was just at the cusp of World War I. So we're going to paint the picture because this has a lot to do with what happened next. And we're talking about the robberies. So don't speak the enemy's language. How many of you have heard somebody speaking Spanish near you and say, speak American? I'll leave it there. Is this tomorrow? America, there was, you know, a Red Scare. There were a lot of Reds going on. There was bombings. There was subversive information being, so this was a big issue in the United States at that time with all these strange immigrants coming into our country, quote unquote. What's going to happen to us? Well, what happened is we went into World War I. And many immigrants, as soon as they got off the boat, they were like, okay, you're a citizen here, you're going to get back on the boat, you're going overseas. And they put them in the front lines to be shot first. So Sacco and Vanzetti, Galliani suggested that people not sign up for the draft or answer the draft. And a number of these folks, of these Galliani followers, Italians, went to Mexico. And so they dodged the draft, which did not go over well later on in their court case. The conditions of this Mexican camp were horrific. There wasn't enough food. They forgot to invite the women, I think, to set it up correctly. Sorry, that's a ginger thing. But even so, it was a mess. It was total chaos. Sacco came back. I mean, Sacco was a married man, you know, with a beautiful family. Why would he go and sleep in a tent in the dirt? So that's kind of what his opinion was. And he came back to the United States. Vanzetti came shortly after that. But they were still not drafted into World War I. So, I'm going to come back to that one. I want to go here. So they meet. This is prophetic because at these meetings about going to Mexico is where Sacco and Vanzetti first meet. They probably met at a meeting, an anarchist meeting, we don't know where. It could be, I believe at this time that when Sacco returned to the United States, he had moved to the Dedham area. And so that was a little closer to Vanzetti and where those meetings were happening in that area on the North Shore. So we get to robbery one. 4 men, December 24th, 1919, notice the date, it's Christmas Eve. 4 men attempt to rob the payroll of the White Shoe Company in Bridgewater. So witnesses would say that they saw these men get into a car, that they were swarthy and dark-skinned. and that they saw them drive away. One of the people in the car turned around and shot, but they didn't hit anybody, and they got away. If I recall, it was not a successful robbery. Unsuccessful, and no one was hurt. So they were trying to rob a moving payroll truck. There's a little tidbit about another anarchist's bomber. You'll go that way. All right. So that had happened already. They hadn't had any suspects. They had some, quote, witnesses that saw what was happening. And then robbery 2 happens April 15th, 1920 in South Braintree. So 2 men armed with shotguns kill Frederick Palmenter and Alessandro Berardelli, who are employees of the Slater and Morrill Shoe Company. Again, a shoe company. So I think that's probably where they may have connected Sacco, saying, oh, well, he knows the shoe factories and the shoe companies. He's our man. And so the thieves robbed the payroll, and they shoot at both of them. Later on, Mr. Palmenter dies. And the stolen Buick used by the South Braintree bandits is found 2 miles from Mr. Kowachi and Mr. Buddha's home. Mr. Buddha, misspelled his name there. Mr. Buddha was a bomb enthusiast, let's call him. He was known for that. He also distributed subversive materials, the Galliani newspapers. He was well known to the police for this. And so after this, let's see if we can get where's the picture? There's the picture of the car. So the police have 2 holdups, and both have made off in a car. Not too many people had cars. In both crimes, the witnesses said that they saw people who were dark-skinned, they assumed Italian, dark olive complexioned, and actually they found out that the holdup gang were actually Portuguese. Sorry to our Portuguese neighbors here. Mr. Mario Buddha lived in Cochesset. This was his car. He was an anarchist, number 2, and number 3, he owned a car. So he must be, guilty of the crime at the time. So they hatch a plot with the garage owner to see if they can catch him. And when the owner came for the car, the person at the garage was supposed to call the police. So Sacco and Vanzetti, Mr. Vanzetti goes to New York and speaks to another sort of influential organizer, anarchist, where is he? Carlo Tresca. Excellent book. It's called Portrait of a Rebel. I highly recommend a flip through that book if you want to see amazing things that a person could achieve in their life. So Vanzetti goes to New York, talks to Mr. Carlo Tresca, who's, again, influential, and says, what should we do? We are, they're trying to confiscate, after the robberies, the Palmer raids that were happening at this time in around 1919, and materials were being confiscated. They were being confiscated. They were rooting out the Reds, let's call it. And so Sacco and Vanzetti were worried about, they had materials in their homes and in these places. They wanted to help their friends. And so they take the streetcar to West Bridgewater. This is on May 5th. And the garage owner, as I said, she was supposed to call the police when someone came for the car. They came for the car. She called the police and said, your guys are here. So at 10 p.m., they get back on the streetcar. They are trying to hide Mr. Buddha's car so that it's implicated in the robberies, and they get picked up by the police. So both had guns on them. This was not unusual at the time. And Sacco also had a pocket full of bullets, but as I said before, he was a night watchman. Of course he would have bullets and a gun. And they lied to the police at first about their whereabouts because probably they were nervous, they were going to be picked up. I don't know. I wouldn't have done that myself, but okay. So neither of them both of them have an alibi for the first crime. Sacco had taken the day off from work and to get his passport, so they could track where he was and when, so he had a perfect alibi for this. Vanzetti was a fish peddler, and the people who could corroborate where and when he was were Italians. I'm seeing a head shake here, yep. They were not provided with translators, so they threw those witnesses out, and Vanzetti was charged with the crime. All right. So the head of the police always believed that that job, both of them, were done by professionals. And not by, these two didn't have a record. Neither had ever known in their communities as being violent anarchists. They knew that they were idealists, but both are charged in this murder in the Braintree holdup. The first one, only Vanzetti, because Sacco had the solid alibi. The second, they were both charged. And they were basing this on the gun that they picked up off of both of them in the ballistics. And they were trying to fit the evidence to the crime. So let's delve a little bit into the crime. There are so many rabbit holes attached to this crime. So I'm going to give highlights. We have another 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll go for questions. Yes? Correct. Okay. And I can just keep going, too. So this is Judge Webster. Because it is. You can go down rabbit holes with this, very much so. This is Judge Webster Thayer. If you've ever been to Harvard, you may have seen Thayer House. I worked at Harvard for 25 years and later on found out. Yeah. He learned law through an apprenticeship. He did not attend school. I don't know how usual that was at the time. And appointed judge of Superior Court of Massachusetts in Dedham in 1917. And he loved the spotlight. He loved being sort of the arbiter of the law. And onlookers swore in the affidavits that he would call them Bolsheviki, and we're going to get those Bolsheviki good and proper. Didn't even... inappropriate for a judge to be talking about this before a decision is made. So maybe coloring the jury or the evidence. This gentleman, Fred Moore, was the defense attorney, the original defense attorney for Sacco and Vanzetti. He was a union appointed lawyer. He had done great things in another time, but he was not a great lawyer for Sacco and Vanzetti. He was from California. Judge Thayer was sort of an upper crust gentleman who believed that you should attend court dressed properly, and Fred Moore was kind of, geez, it's hot, I'm going to take my coat off, and my hair's mussed up. And Thayer called him a long-haired anarchist from California, cannot run this court. So, what Fred Moore, I love this quote at the top, an Italian accused of murder in Massachusetts stands about as much chance of a fair trial as a black man accused of rape in the South. So we know what side he was on. He was not an effective lawyer for them, and made many missteps throughout the case in their defense, and they were considered guilty. Part of that is the failure of Fred Moore in being able to represent their case adequately. This is Frederick Katzman. He was the prosecuting attorney, and he had a habit of dismissing jurors and witnesses. And because he decided he wanted to flood the jury with his cronies, he dismissed hundreds of jurors to hear the case, and was at his Mason meeting later on that night and decided, I'm just going to invite my Mason buddies to be the jury instead. And that held up in court. Here's Alvin Fuller, and he was, his part in the Sacco and Vanzetti case comes a little bit later, when the case could not be decided, when they had already exhausted all of their appeals, and they still could not decide the case. Thayer decided to appoint 3 of the smartest men that he knew to review the case. Alvin Fuller was one of them. He was called the car man. He was just a very successful man, businessman, auto dealership, if you know Peter Fuller Olds in Newton, Mass, descendant. All right. And so, let's see, do we have, I want to talk about, no, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back up. Let's talk about, we're going to quickly go through ballistics, and then we'll talk about some of the outrageous aspects of the trial. Now, I have held these bullets in my hand from the Felicani, oops, here we go. And bullet number 3 was the contested bullet, the circled one. It's different from all the other ones. This was supposedly the bullet from Sacco's gun. It was the bullet that was taken from the body. That was supposedly the one that was taken from the body, but it wasn't. This bullet was actually planted as evidence by the police, who took the gun that Sacco had, at a later date shot it, which was proven with current ballistics, and called that the bullet that killed the man, and convicted Sacco. So he was innocent. And some of the questions that were asked. What is your opinion? My opinion is that this bullet is considered with being fired by that pistol. And that was considered, this was the expert for ballistics, who may not have noticed the finer points that we can see now. Okay, some of the aspects of the trial, wildly disparate descriptions of who the people were who did these robberies. And so if you can see this a little bit, the forehead was high, the hair was brushed back. I think it was 2 inches and 1.5 inches in length, dark eyebrows. This description was given a year after the murder, all right? And some of the witnesses said that they could see the whole thing. They could not see it from the window they were at. Working in the secretary of the shoe factory said she saw everything. She had no angle to see what was going on in the street. Witnesses who were Italians, who were for the defense, were routinely deported. They were not they spoke Italian. They were not allowed to have translators. Here we go. I wouldn't say it was him, but it's the dead image of him. And that was considered okay. So there was judge bias. Thayer asked, Mr. Katzman of Sacco, do you say you love a free country? Do you love this country in the month of May 1917? Did you go to Mexico to avoid being a soldier for this country that you loved? What does that have to do with the crimes? Nothing. So This man, although he may not have actually committed the crime attributed to him, is nevertheless morally culpable because he is the enemy of our existing institutions. Imagine. Okay. This is Celestino Medeiros, who is the person who probably committed the crime. He confessed in jail just while they were waiting on appeal. He gave details that no one else would know, and they ignored it. They said, no, we can't have it admitted to the case right now. And at this, there were motion after motion. This confession of Celestino, confessions from other people who were involved with Celestino, saying they had done this. All of it was thrown out of court and not considered. And we're going to consider, okay. So during this time, they waited in limbo for 7 years. And, you think about it, they were executed in 1927, and this was appeal after appeal, all of it denied by Judge Fuller. He presided over all things having to do with the Sacco and Vanzetti case and kept denying everything. And as you saw, had a bias against them, against Italians, against Reds. Both Sacco and Vanzetti suffered mental breakdowns while they were in jail. Sacco was actually hospitalized for a while, but they were returned to Charlestown Street Jail to await their sentencing. While Sacco was in jail, she gave birth to their daughter. This is their son, Dante. I think he was about 7 or 8. All right. Protests happened all over the world about this case. Dorothy Parker marched in protests in New York. Edna St. Vincent Millay. I cry to you with a million voices. Answer our doubt. Exert the clemency which your high office affords. There is need in Massachusetts of a great man tonight. It is not yet too late for you to be that man. And she was writing to Fuller. Eugene Debs, the famous lawyer, wrote letters of support. Mail came in from all over the world. There were protests all over the world. London, New York, Germany, France, Lisbon, all over America. And he referred to the opposition press as the car dealer. So this I already spoke about, so I'm going to skip ahead. Lawrence Lowell was also one of the people. Lowell House, if you've ever been on the Harvard campus, Lowell House. He believed that only a homogeneous society could safeguard the achievements of American democracy. He wanted to absorb immigrants into American society. He just didn't want to live next door to them. And this is President Samuel Stratton of MIT. He was the third most learned man. And he was a little bit more of as you might imagine, reviewing the case, but he went with the other two people's decision that they were guilty. I'm going to pass on that. Okay, this is just a cartoon that talks about, this is an interesting drawing like this one over here. The woman, she's trying to describe what she saw and various descriptions. I think this is easier. It's not as easily read here. I'm going to pass along. These are some of the art. That's an artwork. There were plays. Woody Guthrie has an album about Sacco and Vanzetti. You can hear it on Spotify or on YouTube. So they were convicted, guilty of the murder. And this is a picture of, they were sent to the electric chair. This is a picture of their bodies being unloaded from the van coming from the prison. Here is the electric chair that killed them, and also Celestino Medeiros. This is the Death Watch in New York. This is Hanover Street in Boston, the demonstration that happened for them waiting for the verdict of the trial. Heartbreaking. And Vanzetti, I tell you now that all that I know of your father, this he's writing to Sacco's son Dante, he is not a criminal, but one of the bravest men I ever knew. Your father has sacrificed everything dear and sacred to the human heart and soul for his faith in liberty and justice for all. You will be proud of your father, and if you are brave enough, you will take his place in the struggle between tyranny and liberty, and you will vindicate his name and our blood. And Sacco, what good is the evidence and what good is the argument? They are determined to kill us regardless of evidence, of law, of decency, of everything. If they give us a delay tonight, it will only mean they will kill us next week. Let us finish tonight. I'm weary of waiting 7 years to die when they know all the time they intend to kill us. Yeah. All right. So they awaited execution in their cells. They refused a priest. I heard a little story of that from Spencer Sacco, that when the cardinal was interviewed by the newspaper, he kind of was like, I'm washing my hands, I'm not getting involved. And yeah, they took issue with that, I think, for the rest of their lives. I love what Vanzetti says. I wish to forgive some people for what they are now doing to me. Imagine. Does he sound like a killer? I don't think so. So, at the Langone Funeral Home in the North End, mourners lined the streets. They had open casket. Police blocked the routes which passed the State House. And at one point there were fights between the police and the mourners. My grandfather was there. He showed me a clunk in his head that he got at that very scene. The hearses reached Forest Hill Cemetery and the bodies were cremated there. Sacco's ashes were sent to Torre Maggiore. I'm going there in May. Vanzetti's ashes were buried with his mother in Via Falletto. And these are my pictures. So, yep, you can see who they are. Here is Nicola Sacco, Mr. Vanzetti. Yep, these are some of the armbands that they would wear in the demonstrations. There's also the Justice Crucified on the poster. These are some of the pins that the protesters would wear. These are all available to see in the Felicani collection at the Boston Public Library. You can see and hold some of these artifacts and more. You have to make an appointment. It's in the, I think it's still in the rare book collection, but if you just say Felicani collection and Google it, you'll find it. So there were memorials all over the world to them. So this is in the Tuscany region in Carrara. I saw that last year. This is a monument outside the Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham, and where the robberies took place in Braintree. I heard that's not there anymore, but I'm going to go and see, and I'll let you know. And then in 1977, Governor Michael Dukakis, and here is Spencer and Ms. Rosina Sacco. Here is Spencer Sacco here. He was a longtime music teacher in Rhode Island, extremely private. And so they made a proclamation. Originally, I heard from the family that Dukakis was going to give them a pardon. And the family argued, that people shaking their heads, they know what I'm going to say, I think. The family argued, they said, if you pardon him, that means he was guilty. What you need to do is give them a proclamation. They were innocent all the time. They were unfairly treated. And that's what Michael Dukakis did. Yay, Michael Dukakis. And I loved what he said. To reflect upon these tragic events and draw from their historical lessons. The resolve to prevent the forces of intolerance, fear, and hatred from ever again uniting to overcome the rationality, wisdom, and fairness to which our legal system aspires. And he said it in Italian and in English. All right, here's a little bit of my own personal story. So, here's where my grandparents lived, in that house right there. And here is where Ms. Rosina Sacco lived after he was executed. And apparently she was very private. She would not open her door. People would come and to want to talk to her. People would leave food on the door, on the doorstep. I don't blame her after all of that, but, and here is that woman who fed him. This is Caroline, this is my grandpa. He was a stonemason, and that's me. And this plaque sat outside of the the rare book area where Sacco and Vanzetti collection was. It's not there anymore, and I don't know what they're gonna do with it, but I'll have a lot to say if they don't put it back up. I wanna read it. What I wish more than all in this last hour of agony is that our case and our fate may be understood in their real being and serve as a tremendous lesson to the forces of freedom, so that our suffering and death will not have been in vain. And that is the end of the slideshow. And questions, comments. How do you feel about all of that? Anybody want to share what they're thinking about?
It's just outrageous.
Indeed.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody have a connection to Sacco and Vanzetti here?
Just, I think that the real villain is Judge Thayer.
100%. 100%.
It's outrageous. And, Dukakis, very carefully put together his words, but it's true, like, this was so evident that they weren't guilty, and it was just a foregone conclusion and unreal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And prejudice, right?
Right. And I only read a couple of the comments that Thayer said. He would speak to the press like this during the case, that he would say these things in the press, and it didn't make any difference. Nobody called him on it, which was unusual. Today, if somebody had that kind of, right? Yeah.
It would have been canceled just like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any questions? Comments?
Where did the Sacco, in Milford, where did the Sacco kind of live on what street?
That's I wish I knew. What is it?
Hayward Street.
On Hayward
I
Street.
wouldn't say that, I'm pretty sure.
If you read Catherine Marenghi's good name, she refers to it. So it's an historical novel, but she researched it good.
Ooh. How did we spell her name?
Catherine Marenghi spoke here last year.
MARENGHI, Catherine.
And it was, what street was it again?
Hayward.
H-E?
HAY.
Her family lived on Hayward Street, so.
Wow.
Well, that's what he wrote.
Yeah. Well, given that there's a lot of folks remember certain aspects, my neighbor, Mary Jo, has said many times that she,
Yes, think of what.
that people, that she knew.
My grandmother lived on Jefferson Street, at the corner of Jefferson Street and Spring Lane. There's a little lane that connects Jefferson Street with Spring Street, Spring Street, okay. And she had a boarding house, and this is what we were told, my father told me, that the two gentlemen, they rented a room up there. But on Sundays, the people going to church would use that Spring Lane, and they yelled out all bad things to the people. So my grandmother said, you can't stay here. Because they were yelling out
Things.
things to the people going to
And, you know,
church.
do we know,
So-
they were anarchists. They didn't believe in the church, they didn't believe in government, they didn't believe in
Well,
any of
they
that.
would say, you know, you're stupid, you're, what are
Yeah,
you
why
doing?
waste your time, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah. Yeah, they were
yeah,
very
and stuff like that.
anti-church as far as I
Yeah.
understood, too.
So, that's,
Very interesting, yeah, we get a lot of anecdotal, and everywhere I go, I say, oh, I'm a Sacco and Vanzetti, Sacco and Vanzetti historian, and somebody knows something. Or somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows something. You know, it's fascinating in this area,
So the
so.
plain section was based around Oliva's Market.
That's what I was gonna.
Thus Sacred Heart Church and beyond was the Italian section of Milford, and Sacred Heart Church was the Italian church.
And that's
The
why
other
Calzone
side-
Park is right
Yeah,
there
the
too,
other side of
right?
the bike trail was St. Mary's, thus the Irish and Portuguese. That's how the town was divided
That's
when
it.
I was a kid.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of us here from the St. Mary's property, I live there as well. And it's a lot of fun to hear about local history and how important that is to the shape of the country, really, it's right here in Milford, in Hopedale, you know? So, very interesting.
That's why all the clubs are on that side, the Macachani Club, the Italian Vets, the whole Boken Club. That was all the Italian section. of
That's
Milford.
it, that's it. And so, also, one of the things that these anarchist and socialist groups would do is that they were a benevolence club. So they would help people in need. And there were a couple of these organizations that are still in existence. I am part of one. Let's see if I can spit it. It is the Chada Benevolent Society. Here, I'll just put Benevolent Society. They're in Newton, and they were a work group for Masons that came from the Atina and Monte Cassino area, and stonemasons talked and knew each other. They knew the stonemasons from Torre Maggiore, and so there's a connection there for me with being part of the benevolent societies. And they would help Italians. I mean, you know, there wasn't any social services at that time. New immigrants, you know, they needed clothes, they needed everything. And these societies would help them and band together and organize to help them get what they needed. I think we see some of that still. There's like, in this town especially, there are like little clubs that are still in existence.
Well,
I've seen them.
that's what
That's
sections. you
The
came
Italian
from.
American clubs, yeah,
Yeah.
so it's very interesting, you know, what is still with us from that time, so, anyway. Any
Great
other
job.
questions or?
Great job.
Thank you so Yes, this brick, I have this brick, oh, I want to read from my story, all right. I will read from my book. This brick is from the Draper factory. And I hopped over the fence. And just to remind myself, why am I doing this? All right, so I'm going to read you a little passage from my story. It's short, so. And, all right, so as I got crazy with the research, I said, I have to have an outlet for this somehow. There's already so many excellent books written about it. I'm not going to write another Sacco and Vanzetti history book. But I'm a fiction writer. And so I decided, so in looking through the Felicani collection, there are beaded items that were made by the prisoners. But among that, there is this purse. I don't have a picture of it anymore. I have to get one. A beaded purse, it's got like a peacock thing on it, and it's like a fancy ladies' 1920s beaded purse. Nobody knows whose it was or why it was in the collection. So as I did my research and I kept going back to the library, I started like, I have this thing where I let the story tell me what it wants to say. And I said to the beaded purse, what do you want me to tell? And it said, I have a grenade inside me. And so, bing, so my character is just a working immigrant girl, walking through the streets, but she gets involved in the anarchist movement, and she ends up walking down Hanover Street with that little purse with a grenade in it, and she's gonna break them out of the Charles Street jail. That's the purpose of my story. So, and it's called I Shall Be Released. So let me tell you a little bit about the characters. My main character's name is Leda, L-E-D-A. There was a very famous female anarchist named Leda, and I named her after that. She lives in the North End. Her brother Dante, who's kind of getting in trouble, not working enough, and he's getting involved in anarchist activities, some for fun, some he says he's got ideals. And Giovanni, a friend of her brother's, is really an anarchist, and he's free love, free thought, very different to Leda than any guy she's ever met. So anyway, all right. She works in various places. She does kitchen work, she does sewing, she does whatever she can to support her family. So she's taken a job in the Commonwealth Avenue area, and I kind of matched this with historical fact. Enrico Caruso came to Boston at this time, and he didn't declare what his politics were, but he would go to wealthy homes in cities where he was performing and do private performances after he did his main performance for a fee. And he had multiple girlfriends that he had to support. So Mr. Enrico did a lot of these. And so my thought was, he's singing at this house. He's singing these Neapolitan love songs in the upper crust of the house. All the Italian girls who know these folk tales are in the caged section of the house in the kitchen, not allowed to go upstairs, singing along with Caruso. All right. So my girl, Leda, she's just finished a big job. The cool air felt so good after the kitchen's furnace-like temperatures. Leda wanted to drink in as much of the evening air as she could before she had to walk back to the train station for the last car to the North End. She leaned her sore back against the edge of the brick corner and pressed in where it hurt the most. Orange blobs behind her eyelids swirled, and she let her shoulder muscles drop down. When Leda opened her eyes, a car engine with lights off sputtered at the end of the driveway. 3 hatted men inside, when the car stopped, didn't get out. The engine's whir was an odd sound above the city's muffled din. Leda crept to the corner's darker side and watched as the 2 in the back seat slunk their heads getting out. The driver hunched down in his seat and swiveled his head to all corners of the car. The taller of the 2 had straw-like blonde hair poking out from under a flat cap. If this blonde man heard her thoughts, his familiar set of green eyes would look towards the area she hid behind. She sucked in hot breath and clenched her throat not to cough. "This is not the place for you, little girl," he said, and pulled her out of the dark. "I'm working at this house. What are you doing here?" she hissed. She'd met this gentleman before. "Oh, pretty girl, now that you've seen my face, what I'm doing here is what you're doing here." Giovanni grabbed the fist about to hit him and strong-armed her around. He crooked a lanky oil and burnt metal-smelling arm around her throat and wound her long hair in his fist. Leda was a North End girl. Giovanni was an amateur using brawn over might. Leda kicked backwards and bit a beefy section of forearm clear through to blood. "Oofa!" he growled, and his comrade came back to them. Leda saw one of the maids scurry out and hoped the little red-headed one was out already. She hadn't seen her leave. Stocky man tied a rag and was tied around her head to keep her mouth open and muffled. The other man let go of her legs when the rope was securely tied. "Stay quiet and you live, capiche?" he said. "You understand?" And she shook her head, yes. The fight was far from over, and she devised every way she could to escape on this long, bumpy ride. Later, with her head resting on a moldy-smelling blanket, her hands and feet free again, her hearing was not quite right. A constant hum and side ring kept most other sounds too far away. Strong coffee steam wafted under her nose, and the smell of warm bread followed. She opened her eyes to the beatific face of her brother Dante, eyelashes curled over his eyelids, brows furrowed in concern. I'm gonna knife that blonde Cavone Giovanni right through the heart. Lida, it was for your own good. Look, what happened? You're alive. Tell me you would have come with Giovanni willingly, and I'll call you a big fat liar. Two voices grew louder, and a minor fistfight broke out before others pulled the two arguers away. The bomb had gone off too early in the hands of the bomb maker. The impact affected a window, some of the side pipes, but not too much of the structure of the house. Their comrade was no longer. There was a deep discussion with much extreme gesturing of what to do with his remains. Should they try to ship back to Italy now? Too risky. They could bury him here and dig up his coffin if they needed to move him, and that seemed to be the best of all the worst. There you go. Thank you so much.